Street apologist. 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 On the radio.
How many roads? Too many signs, I can't read them. Wouldn't recognize the turn even if I seen it. Been driving all along, feel like I'm dreaming. Okay.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Street Apologist Live. How are we doing out there? Today is Thursday, January 9th, 2024, and I'm your host, Vocab Malone. This is the program where we serve the underserved and look into the overlooked. And a major bomb has just landed on the Apologetics playground where you've got Wes Huff on Joe Rogan. Yes, everyone's pretty much talking about it. I was a little delayed getting this together. I had trouble with the clips, so hopefully we'll see which clips work, and hopefully this doesn't get copyright strike and all that stuff. We're not going to be able to cover everything. We're going to cover some things. The first thing I actually want to cover is my favorite part of it, and it's where he gives him a manuscript. So I know we're going to be talking about the resurrection tonight, but I want to start with this clip because this is one clip I do know will work. So let's get right into it here tonight, and I'm glad you're joining me.
Quite apparent that you are an actual expert in the Bible and in many religious texts, and that he didn't necessarily have the facts straight. So
yeah.
What was the fallout of all of that?
Well, it's interesting you say the expert thing, because I literally was asked to do it 24 hours beforehand. So I had like the least amount of preparation going into it, and I was okay with that because I'd listened to Billy Carson. Well, and I'd listened to the stuff he'd said. So I knew enough about the ways that he'd articulated things about the ancient Near East and the Bible and Christianity to know enough that his level is pretty surface, but the fallout was that not only did he not want us to release the conversation, but then he started throwing out cease and desist letters, and then he started, trying to sue people.
Okay, so let me give the background first to this situation. The background to this situation is where you have Wes Huff have a discussion with Billy Carson. And then they have this discussion, and the video gets hidden because of Billy Carson's antics. Then the video comes out, and Billy Carson starts threatening to sue people and all that stuff. Well, see, Billy Carson has been a guest on Joe Rogan's program before. And these guys like Joe Rogan, they're not supposed to, be fact-checking. They're not researching everybody that they're looking at, right? People are saying the audio is cutting out. Let me see here. Let me flip it over here to do something. How is it now? Please let me know. I don't see any problems on my end. Everything's A-okay. So let's just keep it going now. And so somehow Joe Rogan gets wind. Right, that Billy Carson got thoroughly dealt with by an actual expert, of course. And so then we look and we see, and next thing you know, Wes goes on Joe Rogan. I don't really listen to Joe Rogan. I'm not saying I hate him. I don't really have strong opinions on the matter, really, right? So what I know, though, is that he frequently has the number one biggest podcast as far as numbers, and so that's a very real thing that he has that. So Wes Huff being on there is a big deal because this is a Christian apologist who knows his stuff. And Joe hasn't always been friendly to Christianity. So this is a fascinating development, and it just happened. Somebody checked the numbers on this interview The clip I'm going to play, one of the clips I'm going to play tonight, it's got almost 2 million views as of January 7th. The clip is Wesley Huff gives historical take on the death and resurrection of Jesus. And so that's the background. But they didn't talk about Billy Carson the whole time. They talked about the Bible and other stuff. So now here's the clip I was saying I was going to play. Let's see if it works. I know some of you guys had some problems. Let's give it a shot here and see.
These tiny manuscripts, and you figure out, okay, well, what does that look like on the page? I also made you. So this is, I used 2 different variations of papyri.
And pause it right there. This is pretty cool. You know, Wes Huff, I guess we could call him an arts and crafts guy. It's more than that. It's more than that. But he actually made a imitation of P-52 there. He's holding there in the glass case. And he gave it as a gift to Joe, which is just really cool. It's just really cool. It's just, this is so cool. I mean, P-52 is something you learn about, and then you see, whoa, this guy's giving it to Joe, and I hope it hangs up in the studio and sticks around. And he talks about it briefly. By the way, if you're watching this video and your audio is good, and even if it's not, can you hit that like button? Go ahead and hit that like button, please. Thank you.
Whoa. So you have there where P-52 would have been on the page, and based on it's called codicological conventions, the spacings of the words, and the way that the size of the margin that we can see, where it would have been on the page and how big the page would have actually been. So
Wes Huff is getting into the weeds of codices and textual criticism plus. The stuff he's talking about is textual criticism plus. You're talking about the features now of manuscripts. On Joe Rogan. What a witness and testimony to the Bible's veracity. This is his archaeology, too.
This is like a reconstruction, and then I filled in the rest of the text in the same sort of stylistic hand of the scribes at that time, what that page would have looked like. So this would have come from, what would have been essentially a pocket copy of the Gospel of John.
Wow. That's unbelievable. Wow. That's so fascinating.
So this is the kind of work that I do in terms of trying to figure out, okay, you have these fragments. How big would have this codex actually been? How big would have the document been? And then you compare and you contrast them to, say, like non-Christian literature, like Thucydides or Tacitus or Pliny or Cicero or Cassiodeo, those kind of guys.
And he's getting to the weeds of ancient Greco-Roman literature. This is so cool. Guys, I hope you understand how cool this all really is. This is such a beautiful thing to see. And what a blessing that we're here in this time to be able to see this. P-52 is, if Christians don't know any manuscript, a lot of time it's the one manuscript they know. And that's because it gets brought up a lot because it's so old. Yes, it's small, but like he mentioned, this might have been basically like a pocket-sized New Testament at the time. Very small, John 18. And it's amazing because it's also when you have Jesus interacting with Pilate. It's a beautiful, beautiful thing. And here we are watching it together in 2024. Shout out to Yondell, the one and the only who really makes this channel run. I appreciate that very much. You always bring the thunder. And I thank you very much, Yondell. Well done. Seriously, thank you. You're very generous, and I greatly appreciate it, and I think everyone watching this channel does too.
And look at the differences between how these documents would have been put together and written in their day.
God, it's so beautiful. It's just so bizarre to imagine these people writing this stuff down so long ago.
This is dope. This is dope. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to try to play something, but I don't know if you're going to hear the audio. So let's find out if you guys are going to be able to hear this audio. I'm hoping that you can. So let's give this a shot. Okay? I'm going to need you guys to let me know if you can hear this audio once I hit the play button. So here we go. Are we hearing audio? Are we hearing audio? It looks like you're not hearing audio, are you? Guys, are you able to hear this audio? I need you to let me know. No audio. What is the problem? Okay. I'm working on it. Mute microphone. Okay. 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 I'm going to switch to something else. Try. Here's the next idea. All right, let's see if you can hear this audio now. I'm trying something different. What about this audio? Can we hear this audio? I don't think you can hear that audio either. Okay, I think we're going to have to do it where we just listen to the audio basically alone. We won't have the video. I have that set up as a backup because I was having troubles with this earlier. So sorry about that, guys. I'm glad you're here, and I appreciate everybody. Okay, let's just go with the audio. Tell me if you can hear this audio now.
The Joe Rogan Experience.
Now can you hear it?
Because of this claim that they say they saw Jesus resurrected. Like there's something different that goes on there that they're like, this is a miracle, right? Dead people don't usually rise from the dead.
So what is your personal belief when it comes to the resurrection? What do you think happened? Do you have a belief, or do you just try to interpret the text and try to see what is the message?
Okay, so we're going to do this a little bit different, and it's probably going to be good because it probably won't be problematic as much for copyright issues. So we're listening to the clip that Joe Rogan's team released on JRE Clips where Wes Huff was on. So they've released the full 3-hour interview, but what we're going to hear now, we're going to hear the audio from the one clip they released. Now, what I'm hoping is that this clip does well, and so they release other clips. Obviously, there's a lot more that took place in the interview, but we're just looking at this one part. So on this part, they specifically talk about the resurrection, and I think it's fascinating that the first clip they released from Wes Huff interview is the center of Christianity, the resurrection. Isn't that beautiful? So now Rogan asks him, how do you interpret the resurrection? And he's looking... Notice how he leads with, do you just try to get the message out of it? So it's like, Is this just something that you think has a message but didn't really happen, wasn't historical? Let's listen to how Wes answers as they talk about the resurrection.
Well, I think, so as a historian, I do think it is a historical question. You have a guy who objectively lived, he objectively died, and then individuals close to his inner circle claim that they see him not dead.
Right.
Again.
This is a highly unusual activity.
Highly unusual.
Right. So, but it's hard when you're dealing with illiterate populations, you're dealing with thousands of years of time,
So it's interesting, he says, is when you're dealing with illiterate populations. Well, okay, I know what he means, but obviously the people who wrote the gospel records aren't illiterate. I mean, I know that he understands that. I'm just drawing that to our attention. But it actually brings us to a point. You could maybe consider Luke sort of an elite member of society, being a doctor. But John, he's not an elite member of society, and yet here he is writing this important historical document. My point also is to show you that he's literate in some way. He's able to communicate in Greek. Now, why does that matter? There's evidence that indicates that Jews as a whole, especially we're going to zero in on the first century, were more literate on average than other ancient populations. And it has to do with Torah. So if from a young age you're memorizing Torah, you're not only just memorizing it, a lot of times you're also learning Hebrew, how to read it, how to write it. Now, obviously, there's the professional class, the scribes, but understand the Pharisees, in essence, are lay scholars. They know this book. They're literate. So there's whole classes of people within Jewish society who specialize in that. So that's something that's prized. And it's not like everyone else is just totally literate. Now, Joe Rogan's not making some massive negative point. I'm just talking to you guys to think about this a little bit, you know?
Dealing with an oral tradition, and then you have us sitting here talking about it in 2024, trying to figure it at the end of 2024, trying to figure this out. Literally the end.
Yeah.
Last couple of days. It's very difficult for anybody who thinks of themselves as an intelligent person who's secular to even entertain the possibility that someone died and come back to life.
And I get that. But we've already talked about the fact that we don't think that the only thing that exists is matter and motion. We as in you and I, right? Like, we believe that there's something else going on in this world that's a little bit crazy.
There's something else.
And that to, I think, exclude that, I think excludes something that you're kind of putting blinders on.
So this is really good, because what Wes does here, I want you guys to point out, first of all, he's listening to Joe because he circles back to something that was said previously in the conversation. You guys follow me on that? Something that was said prior in the conversation. So that's important. First of all, he's listening, and he's using that in the conversation to move it forward, because Joe says, well, hey, this is hard to believe, a dead man rising. And he says, well, yeah, but he's basically saying, don't you believe there's something more than just physical matter? There's something else. And so Joe's like, oh, yeah, I do. So Wes is going to use that as an end to say there's a supernatural reality that's present as well. It's not just physical stuff. It's not just material stuff. If that's the case, the resurrection is set in a different context. So that's where you see him using good basic conversational skills.
And you do have, I mean, you're right in terms of all of these ancient conventions and the ways that things were spread around. But the Gospels are written in the lifetime of the eyewitnesses. And they're written in this period of time where you have groups of individuals who could have fact-checked those things. So
how do you fact-check someone coming back from the dead?
Well, if you...
Not a bad question, right? What Wes said was good. What Joe said was good, too. Let's continue on.
How many people saw his body, right?
Well, Paul says that 400 people saw him all at once.
400.
Of course, it's 500. He's talking about 1 Corinthians 15. Paul says 500 there. And so he's bringing that out because understand Corinthians is written within 20 years of the resurrection itself or so, 20 plus years.
People saw the crucifixion?
No, saw the resurrected Jesus. Yeah, 1 Corinthians 15, Paul says that Jesus appeared to the disciples, and then he appeared to 400 people all at once. I mean, if we read the Gospel of Luke and the Gospel of Luke and Acts, so same author wrote these both documents, he says that Jesus was walking around teaching them for 40 days.
So he's saying we have historical evidence by people who claim to be eyewitnesses right there that the resurrected Jesus was really alive. Now, understand that's where Wes's strong suit is to show gospel reliability. That's why he's into all this stuff that he does, and he's right about that. So keep on listening.
After he was resurrected from the dead. And so these are written within a time period when you have people who would have seen Jesus' ministry, who were there, say, at something like the feeding of the 5,000, who could have been able to verify or debunk some of these things that are being said. And you go from a bunch of scared guys who, because Jesus wasn't the only messianic figure who arose and claimed to be the Messiah.
Right.
All right, we're going to stop on that. A few things I want to draw out. First of all, in the Gospel of John, everybody, you do see at least 2 verses where you have indications of eyewitness testimony. Specifically, John 19:35, which reads, "And he who has seen has testified." John in this instance is talking about the crucifixion. "And his testimony is true." John 19:35. And then at the end of John 21:24 says this, "This is the disciple who testifies of these things, and wrote these things, and we know that his testimony is true." So that's important to understand. You see that right there. Now you also have this in 1 John. You have this in 1 John as well, where you have, well, let me see and get to the exact spot I'm trying to look at here. Where'd it go? I just had it pulled up. Oh, there we go. The thing is, it's kind of long, but I'll just read a little bit of it. 1 John 1 begins like this: "That which was from the beginning, which we have heard, which we have seen with our eyes, which we looked upon and have touched with our hands concerning the word of life. The life was made manifest, and we have seen it and testified to it, and proclaimed to you the eternal life, which was with the Father and was made manifest to us. That which we have seen and heard we proclaim also to you, so that you too may have fellowship with us. And indeed our fellowship is with the Father and with his Son, Jesus Christ. And we are writing these things so that our joy may be complete." So you see the Apostle John in multiple letters talking about that. T. Bishop, why doesn't that sound firsthand? He literally says he saw it, so I'm not. How does it not sound firsthand? Not following you on that at all. What would you need to be firsthand? You have a guy saying, "I saw, I touched, I heard." So how's that not firsthand? I think that's the definition of firsthand. Let's continue on with the audio, and Wes left off on a very important point. He said, these disciples were afraid, and you got to understand there was other messianic pretenders during Jesus' day. Now, why is that relevant? Why does that matter, that point that he brought up? Because other messianic pretenders' movements did not survive. Why didn't they survive? Because something happened to their Messiah, and it was often death. So if your Messiah dies, he's not the Messiah. Do you guys see? And so that's why we say, we don't know these other messianic pretenders, but we do know Jesus. There's something different about the Jesus movement. They're saying the Messiah died, but it doesn't end there. They're saying he resurrected. That's why it continued on. That's why he can say he died and yet is still the Messiah, which to most Jewish expectation would be antithetical to the Messiah, that the Messiah would die at the hands of the Romans, whom he's supposed to liberate us from. That doesn't make sense unless he resurrected, and there's a different meaning poured into what the Messiah's mission is supposed to be.
Right.
There were a number of individuals both prior to and after Jesus, but they die and the movement dies with them.
Do you think it's possible that he didn't die? And do you think it's possible that they thought he was dead? Because that does happen. There was actually a case very recently where a guy was about to be harvested for organs. They thought he was dead, and this guy started moving again and came back to life. It's a very, very bizarre case because his family had been told that he was going to be harvested for organs. They were preparing for that. And this guy comes back.
Yeah, I mean, we know a lot about Roman crucifixion.
So sometimes that's called the swoon theory. You know, I don't think Joe Rogan is reading some anti-Christian literature per se. He's just saying, here's other things that you could get. Norusko says, is this your first time watching the vid? No, I watched the entire interview. It is not my first time watching the vid. I watched the entire interview. 3 hours, and I put it on 1.5 speed. It was pretty good. But we're only playing one part. So in the refutation of the swoon theory, a couple things I'd like to bring out. Mainly that what Wes is going to bring out, firstly, Jesus could not have survived crucifixion. These Roman procedures were careful because they wanted to eliminate that possibility. There's even Roman law that laid the death penalty on any soldier who let a capital prisoner escape in any way, including bungling a crucifixion. So that's important. Now, also, according to John 19:31-33, the Roman soldier did not break Jesus' legs, as he did the other two crucified criminals. Now, why is that? If you break the criminals' legs, they can no longer push up on that little footstool they have there on the cross to breathe, because to inhale air, you have to push up. Well, if you break the legs, you can no longer do that. You die by suffocation. So they broke their legs to hasten their death because they needed the corpse to be taken down before Sabbath, John 19:31. See, everything makes sense. You also have John, who was an eyewitness, as we just established, certified that he saw blood and water come from Jesus' pierced side. That's in 34:35. What's that show? That shows that Jesus' lungs had collapsed. He died of asphyxiation. And medical experts vouch for this, as Wes is about to get into. And then you have John 19:38-42. You have the body totally encased in winding sheets. Jesus is entombed. Then you have post-resurrection appearances who convince even the skeptics, those who doubt amongst them, specifically Thomas, John 19-29. It's not possible that you're going to have these disciples psychologically transformed and confident in the resurrected Christ if he merely struggled out of a swoon and then, of course, would need medical attention. He would be half dead. He would be staggering. He'd be a sick man who just had a narrow escape. He wouldn't be worshipped and proclaimed and preached boldly and fearlessly as the divine Lord and the conqueror of death. He'd be like a Jewish Houdini. Houdini was Jewish, but you get the idea. And you're having Roman guards that are stationed at the tomb. How would they be overpowered by this swooning corpse guy? Or how are you going to have the unarmed disciples? So the swooning dead guy, he can't open this great stone at the door of the tomb. And then where did Jesus go? You have a living body to deal with, not a dead one. Why was there no body of Jesus? You know, he would have left traces, right? So it basically is a conspiracy theory. It's basically a conspiracy theory. And the swoon theory is something that doesn't explain the beginning of Christianity in the way that it popped off.
And we know that, and we know that they did their job well.
Yeah.
And so, in fact, if you look at, say, very skeptical biblical scholars, like non-believing, atheist, agnostic Christian scholars, they will say if we can know anything about Jesus, like they'll cast a doubt on a lot of the things that we read about in the Gospels in terms of the actual historical Jesus of Nazareth. They'll say one thing we can be sure of is that he died by crucifixion under Pontius Pilate. Because we have not just multiple attested documents that we refer to as the New Testament, but Roman and Greek and Jewish writers refer to that claim afterwards and talk about the fact that you have this guy, and it's mocked within earliest Christianity.
All right, Wes is making a great point there. If you do read historical Jesus scholars who are not Christians or people who do not take Scripture seriously or don't think the Scripture contains true history, or let me put it this way, that the scripture is not pure or true history. You know, they're not holding to infallibility and inerrancy. People like a Bart Ehrman, obviously, or a John Dominic Crossan, or a Marcus Borg. You go down the list, and of course, you even have sort of moderate scholars like maybe a Raymond Brown or a John P. Meyer or something. Now, when you go across the literature, they say, look, one of the most certain things that we can know about Jesus is that he was crucified. Now, that's not what the Christian who believes the Bible as true historical record, bar none, needs to say, but it's something that a lot of the scholars will say, meaning, I don't know if Jesus said this, I don't know if he really performed this miracle, but I do know Jesus of Nazareth was crucified because we have multiple lines of historical evidence, and Wes kind of hints at some of those from historians. And then also people kind of forget sometimes the Gospels themselves, the New Testament, are multiple lines of evidence attesting to Jesus' death. We don't have any detractors saying otherwise. We just simply don't.
So one of our earliest, in fact, not one of, the earliest depiction of Jesus on the cross is called the Alexamenos Graffito. And it's probably from the end of the 1st century, and it's it depicts an individual with their arms raised in an act of worship, worshiping a man with a donkey's head who's being crucified. Whoa. And right beside it, it says Alexamenos worships his God in Greek. Whoa. And it's mocking, right? Because crucifixion was for the lowest of the low. It was for like slaves. In fact, if you were a Roman citizen,
let me show you just, if you haven't seen it, what he's talking about. I thought I could avoid this. I thought I was going to show. Let me put it on the iPad. I'm going to put it on the iPad. The Alexamenos Graffito. A lot of you have seen this from our brother. BK Apologist has shown this. It's this graffiti in these barracks, and you can see clearly somebody being crucified that has the body of a man and then the head of a donkey. And then the Greek is scrawled on there, Alexamenos worships his God. Peace with God says, Vocab, reach out to Joe Rogan and be a guest at his show, and so you can answer his questions. That would be cool to see. My guess is I probably will never be a guest on Joe Rogan, and that's an understatement. Although I appreciate the sentiment, and I probably wouldn't reach out, but if somebody wants to do it on my behalf, I'm cool with that. Now, let me say this, though. I could see hypothetically in some strain, if something major happens with Hebrew Israelites, and Joe Rogan wants to understand about them, he probably would see at least I'm an option. Now, would he get me, though? I don't know, because he may say, well, who is this guy? You know, let me go to somebody else. And so I could see that, because there's other people who could answer his questions. He might want a professor or something like that. But nonetheless, we'll see. I'll get that graffiti ready, the graffito ready. Let me play some more of this audio.
You were banned from being crucified.
Who was it that got crucified upside down?
Peter.
Why? Was it because like regular crucifixion wasn't good enough for him, or what was he didn't deserve it because Christ had gone through it?
Well, so the story is that they say we're going to crucify you, and he says it's like too big of an honor to die like my Lord, and they say, well, we can fix that.
Oh, Jesus.
It's interesting that he says Jesus in that context, right? Here's the Alexamenos Graffito, and so you see that you have this mockery of this fact. This is not a story that you would want to make up about your guy. This is not a good origin story. He was crucified by the Romans. This is not what you would want to say about your Messiah, unless it really happened. This doesn't fulfill Jewish messianic expectation, and it is something that Romans would laugh at. Paul talks about this is a stumbling block, foolishness to the Greeks, stumbling block to the Jews, because they're like, wait, that's your guy? This is a true thing. And as Wes brought out, we do have Roman examples where they talk distastefully. Crucifixion is not even something you should say. It's such a horrible thing. It was meant to do that. Just like what Saved by Grace said. I'll put your comment on the screen. And you can see Christians being mocked. This is really old. People, what's the early depiction of Jesus? There's an early depiction of Jesus. That's early depiction of Jesus. Notice how it's cross-centered, but yet it's mockery. Yeah, the earliest image of Christ. You're exactly right. Isn't that fascinating? Isn't that fascinating? Good point. Continuing on here.
Shut your mouth, buddy.
Listen, the Romans were pretty brutal.
Oh, yeah. Man.
But this is why we know, like, we have... It's interesting. We know a lot about crucifixion, but crucifixion was seen as so disgusting. I believe it was Cicero who said that, like, the word crucifixion shouldn't even be on a Roman man's lips. Wow. I mean, the word excruciating,
right.
X is off of in Latin, and crus, off the cross.
Oh,
so that's where we get that word, is because this was designed to humiliate, and it was designed to be as painful as possible. There was actually a really good article done by JAMA, the Journal of the American Medical Association, which was done by a number of, I think it was in the 70s.
And they have some really cool illustrations that went with it. I posted this before and shown it on some live streams, what he's about to talk about.
The early 80s. It was done by a group of biblical scholars and then medical professionals. And so they looked at the conventions of what we do know about Roman crucifixion, and then they looked at the descriptions in the gospel to try to figure out, okay, if we could diagnose how Jesus died, how would he have died? And so they basically came up with this idea that he probably asphyxiated to death. You kind of drown in your own blood. But
yeah, it's called On the Physical Death of Jesus Christ, 1986, W.D. Edwards, On the Physical Death of Jesus Christ. You can get this online, the PDF. This is something that you can come by, and the illustrations that go with it are just haunting indeed. Maybe I'll show some in a little bit, but he's making the point that we know Jesus died.
Chances of Jesus surviving the crucifixion, I think, are narrow to none, and the chance of him appearing 3 days later completely fine. I mean, if the first thing you do, if you survive a crucifixion and then you go and you find your disciples, the first thing you say is not, peace be with you. It's get me to a hospital, right?
Do they have them back then?
No, not really.
Also, are we entirely certain of their measurement of days?
So this is an interesting question because of the differences between when the Gospel of John says Jesus died compared to the Synoptics, because John appears to be using the Roman convention of counting time, and the other Gospels, when they describe the timing, appear to be using the Jewish ones. And actually, if you correlate between the two, they match up pretty well. So the thing is, with Jews, any part of a day was considered a day. So 3 days and 3 nights becomes almost an idiom for any part of that day is the day. So if Jesus, and because they count evening to morning is the day, it's very possible that it wasn't like how we would think of 3 24-hour days.
This is important. This gets into issues with some Hebrew roots and Hebrew Israelites friends, because they don't like to have Jesus Christ rising on a Sunday morning, the first day of the week. And so sometimes they'll try to mess with that. They'll be like, oh, look, 3 days, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, but it's only part of a day. That's not really 3. So they'll do things like, he was actually crucified on Thursday, and then Friday, and then Saturday. They try to do things like this, or put him on Wednesday. Well, that theory bores me. Sorry. It's not true. Now, it is true that when you read John versus the Synoptics, he does appear to be using the Roman time. And so you have to put that together when you look at it. Warrior Woman found it. This is an excellent article. It's technical and stuff. But if you don't look at it for any other reason besides the illustrations, I would greatly encourage you to look at this, what Wes is talking about. And guys, I just want to stop you for a second. He's talking about all this stuff on Joe Rogan. This is a huge platform. Didn't Trump go on Joe Rogan, I think? You know what I mean? It's a big deal.
Especially if he dies on Friday and wakes up on Sunday.
So that would actually make it less time than more time.
Yeah.
So it's not like he had recovery time.
Oh.
Joe's still thinking about Jesus swooning and then popping back up, right? And so he's like, well, he'd have less recovery time if that's the case. So he's still thinking on that. But, it's good that Wes is showing it. Saved by Grace says, imagine if Christ is good enough to forgive even those who hung him up there and even drove those nails through his hands and feet or ankles. Because he is that good and just, they didn't know they were hanging God's only begotten Son. If they did, obviously, I don't think they would have done it, to be honest. Amen, amen. Yeah, you are exactly right. So many people viewed it.
Oh, he didn't have recovery
That's
time.
what I'm saying. That's what I'm kind of getting. It's not like it was 3 days. It was actually 3 months.
Oh, no.
Yeah. So,
no, not like
so
that.
Then 400 people saw him afterwards.
That's the claim that Paul makes.
Paul makes this.
Yeah,
500. It's 500. No one's perfect. 500.
How many different people have some sort of a recollection or a writing or something that's attributed to them of being witness to his resurrection?
Well, you have Peter, Paul, Jude, James, and Matthew, Mark, and Luke. The thing with Matthew, Mark, and Luke is that Matthew and John are attributed to direct disciples of Jesus. Luke and Mark are not. So they are not eyewitnesses within the Jesus community.
Now that's important what he just said. I want to bring this up real quick. I wanted to lean into this. Notice how the Christian tradition and the Gospels themselves of Mark and Luke don't claim to be eyewitnesses. You understand what I'm saying? Specifically, Luke says he's not an eyewitness, but he says he interviewed eyewitnesses. Why is that important? If these early Christians wanted to just lie about what happened, and we're not trying to put all their cards on the table, we're just trying to snow people over for whatever reason, why would you divulge that you were not an eyewitness of these events? Wouldn't you say, yeah, I saw all this stuff, I was there? Wouldn't that be the mode of the Christians if they're just like trying to get one over on people? So this is something that you can learn. If the early Christians didn't see an event, they didn't tell you that they saw an event. Luke does not claim to be an eyewitness. Even early Christian tradition got John Mark as the author of the Gospel of Mark, and he's not an eyewitness to all of it. Now, what does Papias say? He says that Mark was essentially Peter's interpreter. So Mark is considered a gospel through Peter's account, and it does feel very Petrine. No doubt about that. In fact, he begins and ends the gospel in a way. So that's important to understand. There's speculation that the young man whose cloak they grabbed might have been the author that one time, saying, hey, that's me. Because it's an odd comment, right? There's a young man who was in the garden and they grabbed his cloak. You guys understand? Most people think that's Mark sort of quietly saying, that's me, I was there for that part. Warrior Woman says, indeed, vocab. There's also the embarrassment truth, where there are things an eyewitness would not have wanted you to make claim to, yet the fact they did speak volumes. Yes, exactly right. Exactly right. Yo, shout out to the best moderators around, Warrior Woman all the way from Australia, plus Dinu, how you doing? And Nate, 2D2, and shout out also to Phil Fox. I got a lot of great friends and great people in the live chat. We've got my man Doki Doki handing out club channel memberships. I appreciate that. Peace with God says, Vocab, are you able to leave this live video up after it's done? Very fruitful with interjections. If not, it's okay. No pressure. Hey, I appreciate that, by the way, because some people don't like the interjections. They're like, Vocab, shut up. I'm like, yo, I'm commenting on this. It's fair use. I'm not just re-uploading someone else's content with, I'm not just doing reactions like, I'm actually trying to fill in some of the gaps of the discussion with you guys, That's the idea, right? So yeah, I will leave it up as long as Rogan's team doesn't come after me. You never know, right? Well, you never know what'll happen, so let's see.
In fact, Luke prefaces his gospel by saying that. He's right up front about this. He's like, hey, I'm not an eyewitness. Don't confuse me with an eyewitness. But he actually uses conventional writing, what's the term I'm looking for? He uses writing conventions of the day that would fit within regular biography that was written within the Roman world. So you have a guy named Quintilian who is basically, I mentioned him before with the...
What he's talking about there is that Luke's gospel, especially, takes the approach most of all as a historian. I. Howard Marshall years ago had a book that is still in my office called Luke the Historian. William Ramsey called him a first-rate historian, an archaeologist. And you also had these comparisons that scholars have done with the way Luke set things up in other historical works of the time. And so Wes is making the point that the genre Luke emphasizes on is history. There's a great book called What Are the Gospels? Did you hear that title? What Are the Gospels? My copy's black and white. It's originally published on Oxford or Cambridge. I forget which one. I think the author's first name is Richard something. It's not super romantic reading because it gets into stats and linguistic analysis. So he analyzes the prologue of Luke, compares it to other Greco-Roman biographies, stuff like that. It goes out of his way to show that's what Luke especially is doing. Now, all the Gospels are they're in one hand they're their own thing, but on the other hand, the genre should be understood as Greek bios. Danzel Williams, shout out to you. How you doing? Who's your Uncle PJ? You got an uncle in here? Who's your uncle there? And again, shout out to Yandel. Everybody, you are welcome here. We love having you.
He's teaching people how to write, and he says that if you're going to write biography, you need to be interviewing eyewitnesses, and you can't be too far away from the event to be able to write these things. And Quintilian, Lucian, and Josephus, who are all these very prominent ancient biographers and writers of history, have a lot of crossover in the way they describe how you should write history with the words that Luke uses at the beginning of his gospel, where he says, I'm interviewing eyewitnesses and I'm writing up an orderly account. And so he's saying, I'm going to use these methods that are expected as good history of my day. I'm not an eyewitness, so I'm going to try to find the people who are eyewitnesses, and I'm going to try to encapsulate this within a document that communicates what is being written.
So we have an account of the resurrection. Do we have an account of the denial of the resurrection? Is there...
That's a great question. That's going to kind of change tracks. Don't worry, we're going to go back to that. Let me comment one more thing on that. There's certain places in Luke where you can ascertain Luke is interviewing an eyewitness. The big one is Mary, because only Luke's gospel says these things like, and Mary treasured these things in her heart. How would someone know what Mary treasured in her heart? Interesting phrase. The idea is to store this up in a very precious way. So these things that were happening around her son and about her son, especially during the nativity element, Luke later on says Mary treasured these things in her heart. That sounds like Mary, the mother of Jesus, telling Luke, I treasured these things in my heart. You have to read the Gospels and ask yourself, how would Luke know this? How would Luke know what Mary treasured in her heart? Unless he's just a liar. He talked to her. Why is that important about Luke as a historian? Let me tell you why. Luke wrote more of the New Testament than anyone else. You're like, no, it's Paul. 13 letters, right? 14 if you want to count Hebrews, which we don't know. What do I mean then? Luke wrote more words of the New Testament. Luke's gospel is thick and weighty. It's got a lot to it. But he also wrote Acts. It's basically considered the sequel. Part 1, Part 2. Understand? So Luke, by word count, wrote more of the gospel than any other person in the New Testament. Now, that's interesting because that means you have someone who is writing as a historian. He documents the life of Jesus and then the continued work after Jesus Christ leaves. We have multiple gospels. We don't have multiple Actses. There's no other equivalent in the New Testament canon or anywhere else where you have something like the book of Acts, which is the first church history. You guys understand? This is important stuff. Just putting your comment on the screen there, Cherokee Gypsy. And thank you, Warrior Woman, as well. And then also Yes, that's true. Yeah, word count. So if you do word count, you got Luke writing more than anyone else. And he writes as a historian. His Greek is also better than anybody else's in the New Testament, with the exception of certain sections of the gospel. The epistle to the Hebrews. Hebrews has high classical Greek. Whoever penned that was very educated. There's a theory that's not a bad theory that Hebrews is a Pauline sermon transcribed by Luke. I always like the Apollos theory better, but we're kind of going off a little bit here. Joe asks a decent question. Listen to this.
Communicates what is being written.
So we have an account of the resurrection. Do we have an account of the denial of the resurrection? Is there an historical record of him just dying and this, like a refutal or a rebuttal rather to what they're saying?
No, the only ones from the ancient world that deny his resurrection are groups that come on afterwards that sometimes are described as Gnostics, and they're not necessarily just denying it for the reasons we might think they were.
He's exactly right, what he's saying there. Everything he's telling you is true. Now, this is interesting because what it shows is the people who denied the resurrection in a way, they didn't deny it in the way you would deny it if it was historical. They basically give it different meaning when they deny it. And it's theological, or probably to be more specific, it's philosophical. It has to do with their worldview presuppositions, why they have a problem with the crucifixion of Jesus. Now, he's going to explain it. What he said so far is exactly right. So let's find out.
They're denying it because they have incorporated ideas of pagan philosophy where they believe that the spiritual is good and the physical is bad. So if Jesus was crucified, let me back up. If Jesus is God, he cannot have a physical body. So they deny that he actually had a physicality to him. This is sometimes called docetism because dokein in Greek means to seem. So these groups that we describe as the docetics, they are denying that Jesus had a physical body. He only seemed to have a physical body. And they wrote documents later on.
So there are documents that are written like in the 100s and the 200s that have docetic, or docetic as he said it, I forget how he said it, but influences in them, and you can tell by certain things that they say. 1 John may be an example of some of the early church wrestling with kind of a proto-docetism, because in it, Jesus is spoken of in very fleshly, real terms. Later on, Ignatius has to get into the same thing even more explicitly. Ignatius of Antioch is very early, I think 106 or something like that. He also gets into very physical descriptions of Jesus. 1 John does it too. Now, 1 John is written really late, maybe in the 80s or 90s. And so he's like one of the last guys. And so maybe that's when you have this sort of proto-docetic heresy arising. And then later on it gets into full-blown Gnosticism, although it seems like most Gnostic sects seem to have elements of docetism inside of them.
Gospel of Peter, which comes around in 2nd, 3rd, 4th centuries, is being written, and it has Jesus kind of chilling on the cross because he's not really physical because he's divine, and physical entities don't have physical bodies. So we don't actually get like a concrete denial of his resurrection.
Exactly right. I read some of those sections he's talking about on the show we did where we showed how the Quran is influenced by Gnostic literature, if you guys remember that. So he's exactly right with what he's saying here. But they're not actually denying the resurrection. I'm sorry, crucifixion. I don't know if I said resurrection. I meant to say crucifixion in all these instances here. The crucifixion. They're denying it was actually Jesus. So they'll have like Jesus laughing at a guy on the cross or talking to people, and they'll say, well, aren't you on the cross? And he's like, that's not actually me. That's some poor soul. So he's laughing over there. And they didn't like the idea of Jesus having a physical body. And so, like I said, I read some of these. So thank you for sharing the comments.
In that way, until you get things like the Gospel of Barnabas in the Middle Ages, which is it's actually the document that Billy brought up to me in the conversation we had is the evidence that Jesus was never crucified, the Gospel of Barnabas. Well, Gospel of Barnabas is 15th century. It paraphrases Dante's Inferno. It's not an ancient document.
I like how there's still a couple chances to bring up the Billy debate fiasco, because he's exactly right. And when I first met Elton Simpson, why did I first start talking to him? If you look up the name Elton Simpson, you'll find out he was a jihadi from Phoenix who tried to kill Robert Spencer and died in the process. I worked with Elton Simpson. I didn't know him as Elton. I knew him as Ibrahim. That's how he introduced himself. But why did he introduce himself? Because when I was leaving out the guard shack at work one day, I look over to my left, and what do I see? I see on the bench there a guy reading the Gospel of Barnabas. And I knew this was something Muslims would read a lot. So I just started right away. Are you a Muslim? Why, yes. How did you know the book you're reading? It's funny because it's like kind of pseudo-Christian literature, although it could have been authored by Muslims. We don't really know from the Middle Ages. And when I first met Elton Simpson, that's what he was reading. This is years ago because he committed his deed in 2015. This is probably 5 years prior to that.
Oh, but in the ancient world, nobody really had that big of a problem with these kind of supernatural claims. The more of the kind of skepticism was why you would worship a crucified individual to begin with.
That's exactly right. Now, we're not saying that all ancient people were superstitious, although there was superstitions. But they accepted more for lack of a better term, I'm going to use these terms loosely here, okay? Understand the spirit in which I say this. They accepted, in general, more a haunted world. Now, it can get into spooky stuff, but at least they understood there was something else besides physical reality. They understood there was a haunted world, a world with multiple layers, multiple dimensions. And I use dimensions not in a way that you might be thinking, but a way to understand that they knew this. All right. So he's right.
Wow. So they were less surprised that he was resurrected.
Or that you would worship a crucified like teacher was just seen as silly.
Because it's so humiliating to be crucified.
Yeah, yeah. And that like a god would let himself go through this.
Right.
Like what are you talking about? In fact, the ancient world didn't really have a problem with supernatural events. There is an ancient writer who mocks Christianity, and he particularly mocks Christianity in saying that, of course, Jesus did miracles because Jesus had a childhood in Egypt. And he goes, all of those Egyptians are magicians anyways. So he just learned the magic when he was a child. So he actually confirms, incidentally, two things, that the narrative in the Gospels where it says that the Holy Family fled to Egypt during the reign of Herod, he corroborates that he actually thinks that happened and that Jesus did miracles. He just attributes the miracles to Jesus being a traveling magician anyways. And, you know, anybody who lived in Egypt knows some magic.
That is what's really fascinating, that the mindset of the people that lived back then was that whatever was going on in Egypt was so crazy that they had to be magicians.
Yeah. Yeah, but everybody believed in supernatural events.
Well, it's interesting. Remember, now this is obviously years separating this, as in millennia. You know, going back to the days of Moses, you have the court magicians there in Egypt who are imitating, to a certain extent, what Moses is doing in the beginning stages. Once it gets to the gnats, they kind of bow out, right? But prior to that, they're imitating in some way what Moses is doing, right? So you do have early mockery of Christianity saying, you know, he was in Egypt, that's where he learned his magic tricks. And even in the Talmud, they're like, hey, this guy had sorcery to lead Israel astray. So they're just kind of giving a non-Yahweh God reason for why he did what he did.
Like there's no such thing as like a secular work in the ancient world. Even Plutarch, who's one of the most famous biographers in the ancient world, he wrote 90 biographies, of which 60 still survive today. He was a priest of Apollo. So like he's already assuming that the gods exist, that crazy things are going to happen in the world. And so they didn't have a problem with people doing miracles or crazy things happening or...
Well, that's also why it's so interesting trying to put your mind into the context of people that lived back then when you try to interpret what these stories were all about, because they did believe in things that weren't real. So when they talk about this thing that we're supposed to believe is real, when you have all this evidence that they believe things that aren't true, it's interesting, right? Because like you're now saying, yeah, but this one really was true,
right?
Well, there's so many different things that they thought of and believed that weren't true.
Yeah.
That is the end of the audio clip I'm playing for today. But I would like to give you guys a chance to jump on and voice your opinion. Have you heard the Joe Rogan Wes Huff episode? Have you listened to the Joe Rogan Wes Huff episode? Have you seen more than what we talked about here today? I just dropped a link in the live chat, and it says jump on. You can come on and give your opinion or ask questions about what we've talked about tonight. Even if you just got a few seconds. Just like to hear what your thoughts are on this episode. Are you down to come on? We're not debating or anything. I just want to find out what you guys think. So let me see if I can switch over to the guest screen. There we go. Let me change this at the top because it's not 2024 year in review. I would love to see you jump on and give your opinion about it. It is in the live chat, so all you got to do is come on, and you can be part of the conversation. And I would love to hear what you think. What do you think of the J.R.E. Wes Huff video? What do you think of it? So I would love to hear what you guys think. The link is also on the screen at the top, but there you have to copy and paste it. But it's in the live chat right now, and I'd love to hear any one of you, even if you just heard the clips from tonight. If you just heard the clips from tonight, then I would also like to hear what you guys have to say. So as we take a look at this, it is very fascinating to look at this all together, because you have something that took place, I think, all the way back in October, this debate between Wes Huff and Billy Carson. And because Billy Carson had been a guest on Joe Rogan before, Wes Huff, because of his debate performance against Billy, ends up on the show. Now, check this out. You might have been watching, I wasn't, Joe Rogan, or thinking when you heard that Billy Carson was on there, and if you knew the players involved, you might be thinking, why would Joe Rogan have Billy Carson on? That's a shame. And you wouldn't be wrong necessarily. But we never know what God is up to. Do you know what I mean? Here's what I mean. You would never know that that appearance might be part of what has Wes Huff answering Billy Carson's claims. And then on top of that, that because Wes Huff put out some material dealing with Billy Carson's claims, that Wes Huff would be the guy that they would have to have a back and forth with Billy when Mark Menard decided to have the back and forth with Billy and someone who knew what they were talking about regarding the Bible. Then that led to an amazing display of truth in the debate talk that Wes had, which led to all kinds of fallout on Billy's end, which led to Joe Rogan saying, well, now let me contact a guy who destroyed one of my former guesses. Robert Tapia, you're raising your hand. Do you want to come on? I've got the link. Right there in the live chat, and I'd love to have somebody jump on and give their perspective, to give their opinion. Let me pin it in the live chat so you can see what I'm talking about. It's already there. And again, I want to thank you for Yondell. You got the one super chat of the show, and I really appreciate that. Faith Refined by Fire says, did you know Wes Huff also did an interview with Patrick Bet-David? It should be airing soon. Yeah, I saw the picture, and that's trippy, and it'd be amazing to see what they talk about on there. These are huge podcasters with huge platforms. And what a beautiful thing now that you got Wes in these places. It's just so exciting. Well, you know what? Let's do our first freestyle of the year. Nobody's come on, but it's still available for you to come on. We're going to go ahead and try to drop it. Let me see what beats I have available here. There's some beats. Let's see how these beats sound. Or maybe I should grab some new beats that I have. Let's find out what's a good one. Let's go with this one right here. On the mic, 1, 2, 3, with power. The show was long, it went 3 hours. Not the one I did, but the interview. 1-on-1, and now that makes 2. Not paid for view, but free on YouTube. Watch it, friends, it's got like 2 million plus views already. West took his scalpel machete to the scalpel, and then he made an mouthful of P52. That's fresh papyri. Peep this out now. The beat putting Jesus on the map. Not literally. The resurrection already went viral, but now we spiral further. Now we spark sun. Hey yo, I'm sorry, but Billy Carson got roasted. So I toast this to Wes. Yes, the man is fresh, working out. Indeed, indeed. Peep this now. I spit with speed on the regular basis. Carson acted kinda racist in his excuse. Video replaced this fact with rhetoric. That's what he did. And now mic check 1, 2. I'm coming through. Peep this out now. Anywho, you know what we see. I'm a real MC. Wes Huff on PBD. That's Patrick Beck. 1, 2 mic check. This is dope. I spit the alphabet, not alpha beta like it was Greek, but it's English that I regularly speak. You can jump on in and come in if you want. If you do, just please don't front. Hey yo, we could do one more, son. And after that, the show is done. Let's try this one right here. Let's try this one here. I gotta turn this up a little bit. Turn this up. Right, it's time. Vocab in the show with a rhyme. 1, 2, all the way to 9, and then to 10. You know it's fine. The beat is dope. It's colder than snow cone. Who's a by? Jonathan Soko. Y'all remember him? First name John. The beat is dope. The beat is the bomb. I rock on and on. What's up to Nate? Hey yo, what's up? I know it's kinda late, it's like 9 o'clock around these parts. I got the Italian flag all on my heart. In the circle, not like Urkel. Peep this out, no, fat girdle. The beat, it needs it, cause the beat is gaining weight. Hey yo, the beat is straight, and then some. The beat is handsome, yes y'all. Christ paid the ransom, not the Satan. That's not how it works. That's an old theory made by jerks. I don't like it, it's not what happened. But now I'm spitting, and now I'm rapping. Shout out to the people, you know I wonder how you up from the land down under. Things spin backwards in the cycle. I grab the beat, you know I go psycho. Hey yo, what's up? TD likes the TACOS, you see, that's tacos for all of the vatos. You know I rock shows, you know that I got those fiery beats about Kyrie. You know that's true, I handle like Kyrie Irving. I'm blurring, I'm stirring the lines, it's fine since 99. Back then I tried to rhyme, learning, but I grabbed the line and wrote another letter with my pen. But now I grab the beat, turned it up to 10. Wow, whoa, plus Vovo. Here we go, broken like a Volvo. Hey yo, peep this out, Joseph Allen. I see how you doing, I'm freestyling. What's up, yo? We got the Boiwa, Roberto, Toppy Top, and plus Yandel, that's my man. Peep this out now, I got my hand, and I'm looking who's in the live chat, who wants to come on. But now that I rap, oh, Anthony Rogers, my favorite criminal. Now I jump on the instrumental. I'm wise, so maybe call me Al. I see the beat and I go, Ow! Not Bundy. Here I go again, you know I run D. Beat one time back like a DJ. The beat's kinda dope, you know I display the illest style. Well, maybe just average. Rock this now, I'm feeling kinda savage. Upon this track, I bust your cabbage. Yes, y'all, that's a fact. Now I'm rocking on and on. This beat's so long, it's like a marathon. Yes, indeed, it's Italia. Upon the hat, I'm warning ya. Peep this, it's the end of the flow. You know we got to go, so vamonos. Oh! Alright, y'all. It's been a great show. God bless y'all. Talk to you soon. Much love.